Ladies and gentlemen, today we start learning how we do our article of the week. I picked an article about Avatar: The Last Airbender on Newsella for you to read this week and complete your annotations. And I hope that you are so totally stoked about that because I know that my kids at home love watching that series. And I know that a lot of you are into manga and anime, although I am told that because Nickelodeon made Avatar that it is not actually anime. So, anyway, I know that much. All right, so annotation. When you are reading a text, I've already had you actually do this a little bit this year. When you're reading a text, you want to be thinking about what you're reading. All right? It is hard to sometimes understand what we're reading. So sometimes we have to go back and reread things because we didn't get them the first time. Maybe the words were above our heads, so we weren't sure what those words meant and it was confusing. Or maybe we are distracted because something else is going on in our lives that makes it hard for us to focus. Whatever the reasons, sometimes we read things and they just go right through our eyeballs and out through our ears, and we do not remember what we read. So annotating helps us to better understand what we read and better focus on what we read and think about what we're reading so that we can really ingest it and ruminate on it and think about what it means in our lives. Okay? So on today's slideshow, the first thing I have here, asks, why do we do this? Well, first of all, annotate. Annotate is a fancy word for take notes. Look right here, N-O-T. Okay, the root word note is actually right here in annotate. So it's a fancy way to say we're taking notes on what we read. But the question becomes, well, how do I take notes? Like, what do I do? What do I write? So the whole purpose of this lesson is to show you how, help you know what to write and what to think about. So we do this so that we can better understand what we're reading. I already went over that. We do this so that we can try to connect with it personally. The truth is, if we can find a way to personally connect with what we are reading, then it makes it easier for us to understand and remember it. If we can think about, why is this relevant in my life? Finally, to think, question, and wonder. Think about what we're reading, ask questions about what we're reading, and wonder, what could this mean in the grander scheme of things? So if you were here in my classroom right now and I were showing this on the whiteboard at the front of the room, I would have you taking some notes. Since you're not here to take notes, I am going to ask that you refer back to this PowerPoint whenever you can't remember what you're supposed to do, because this is a new skill for most of you. Okay, I know that some of you are in my 7th grade class, so you remember this, at least vaguely, from 7th grade. But when I created this slideshow, I created it to be used over and over and over again, okay? And that means you can go back to it over and over and over again when you need it until you can remember these things on your own. So the first thing I want you to react to is what surprised you. Okay, and it doesn't have to be some like super shocking, mind-blowing, blow your socks off experience. It can just be, I never knew that. All right, so when you come across something that surprises you, we indicate that with an exclamation point. So if you were actually writing on a piece of paper, if I were to give you an article on paper, I would ask you to put an exclamation point next to it. So when you encounter the following types of information and you have a mental and emotional responses that affect your thinking, whether it's new, suspicious to you, like, not sure that I believe that, that's kind of surprising. If it is actually shocking, or if you're just like, wow, that is so cool. All right? Anytime you come across information that surprises you, I want you to annotate. So that's reason one. Another is, what do you wonder? Okay, what puts little question marks over your head? If you were actually in class on paper, I would say, okay, I want you to put a question mark next to that particular piece of information. So think about this. What did the author think I already knew? Okay, maybe the author thought I knew what that word meant. Maybe the author thought I knew about that particular event in history. Maybe the author thought that I keep up on politics and I know what's going on with the election. Okay? Those would be things where like you have questions because you're not quite sure what's going on. What do I wonder would just be when it brings up some kind of question about the grander scheme of things in your mind. Okay? So you're going to want to annotate. 1, when I have problems with understanding the text because I lack prior knowledge. Just like the examples I just gave. I don't know the background of that. I don't have the vocabulary for that. I don't know what those things mean. Or when the text makes me think of a question about the world in general, like why are things like this? Or how would things be different if the world were not like this? So if you ask questions about what you are reading, then you're going to help yourself understand the text better. Okay? Instead of just going, nah, I don't get it, and moving on, simply the act of asking the question is going to help you better understand. Okay? Now, a couple of notes about questions. There are 2 main categories of questions when you're annotating. There are thin questions and there are thick questions. Thin questions aren't necessarily bad questions, but they don't really require a whole lot of thinking. Okay? So, questions. See this wimpy guy here? I made sure I chose this really wimpy guy, this thin little guy. I chose that image because I want to indicate to you that those are kind of wimpy questions. Okay? So most students, when they first start annotating, they ask thin questions. Thin questions have 1, easy answers. 2, the answers can be found directly in the text. Or 3, they have answers that can be easily found by conducting a Google search. You can Google it and find a super fast answer. So, questions that have easy answers, questions that can be Googled. Those might be something like, I don't know what this word means. I don't know what the ASPCA is, or ASPCA is. I don't know what the NRA is. What the heck is the DNC? Okay? Those are thin questions. Now, you may need to know the answers to those questions. So they're valid questions. But the truth is that you could find the answer to that in 2.5 seconds with our current technology. So if it's something that you can find super easy answers to, then you should go ahead and just quickly find that answer, and then your understanding is going to grow immensely. All right? Sometimes, too, there are answers that can be found directly in the text. I cannot tell you the number of times I have seen a student annotation where they write, I don't know what the NAACP is. And then in the very next sentence, it says, the NAACP is an organization that fights for the advancement of people of color. Okay? They asked the question, kind of jumped the gun before they kept reading. Sometimes if you just keep reading for a couple more minutes, you get the answer to your question. So please make sure thin questions are not bad questions, okay? But they are questions that you can easily answer yourself. So if it's that easy to answer them, you should be going in and answering them for yourself. Okay? So, thin questions. They're something worthy, but not quite what I want you to aim for when you annotate. Here's what I want you to aim for when you annotate. A thick question. Okay? Notice even my font is thick. I have a picture here of a pumped up brain. It's lifting weights because it is asking thick questions and it is growing and getting smarter because of it. A thick question, 1, requires deeper thought. 2, relies on your own personal knowledge and experience. And 3, can have more than one possible answer. Okay, so a thick question might be something like, should Americans be allowed to own firearms without getting background checks? It has more than one possible answer. There are people who are going to argue, yes, they should. There are people who are going to argue, no, they shouldn't. And you cannot look up an answer to that. There is no one answer to that on the internet. Okay? You know, another thick question might be, you know, how can I relate to the person in this news article who just lived through a bombing in Syria? What would that feel like to have to live through that kind of an experience? Okay, it requires you to really think about it and imagine, what would it be like to have my house bombed out and have to survive that, maybe lose friends and family? Okay, it relies on your own personal knowledge and experience. Well, I know what it's like to see these things happen to other people, but I've never had that kind of experience myself. Okay? It can have more than one possible answer. Not everybody in the world is going to have the same reaction to living through a bombing. Everybody's going to have a different reaction to that experience. Okay? So what I want you to aim for are these thick questions. I wonder, how could the world be different? How is the world like this? Why is the world like this? You know, those are going to start bringing you some thick questions. All right, so we've been through two things. I'm going to back up here. 1, what surprised me? Okay. 2, what do I wonder? 3, what challenged, changed, or confirmed my thinking? So here's what I mean by this. Something that challenges your thinking is something you disagree with. So you would put a check mark next to that information, or if you were writing on paper, or you're going to highlight it, you know, in Newsella. You would highlight that information and you would say, this challenges what I believe. I disagree with this because. Okay? It confirms my thinking. That's something that you agree with. I am going to put a check mark or highlight this in green because I agree with it, and here is why I agree with it. Okay? It is not enough thinking just to say, I agree or I disagree. You need to, in your annotation, say why you agree or why you disagree. Okay? And 3, it changes my thinking. Sometimes you might come across information when you're reading that makes you think differently than you did before you read it. So if it is information that changes how you saw things, then that would be a check mark, green highlight. Okay, I think differently now. This changed my thinking because first I thought this, but now I think that because of this information. So with that said, you know, with changing our thinking, I want you to note this. We read nonfiction to learn information, okay? But learning new information sometimes involves taking that old information we had up here and unlearning it. And that is one of the hardest things to do, is when you thought you knew the way things were, but you come across information that tells you otherwise, okay? Especially in my media literacy class, we're going to be covering this a lot, especially with this being a current election, presidential election year. Okay, people have it in their heads that the world is this way, and then they come across information that tells them that that's not necessarily true, and they have a terrible, terrible hard time changing their thinking. Okay, one of the hardest things that you can do is allow your thinking to be changed. And I'm not saying that you always have to change your thinking. I certainly don't believe that. But when you see the information in front of you, when you see the facts, when the truth is laid out in front of you, sometimes you have to consider, maybe I was wrong. And that is how we grow, okay? So being open to new ideas will make you a better learner and, quite frankly, a wiser person. So think about, why do I disagree? Why do I agree? Why do I disagree? Why do I agree? Or why might I need to change what I thought before I read this? Okay, so that's my soapbox for the day. So here are some ground rules for annotation. Right here. 1, you may not underline or highlight anything without explaining and writing why you underlined or highlighted it. So when you see your assignment on Newsella, it is going to ask you to highlight anything that you question, anything that surprised you, anything that challenged, changed, or confirmed your thinking. If you simply highlight the text and don't put a comment or an annotation next to it, I'm not giving you credit because you didn't do the things, okay? The whole point is explain what you're thinking. Highlighting doesn't explain anything. Highlight is just a highlight. 2, number 1 also applies to putting a check mark, question mark, or exclamation point next to something. So when we're back in class, eventually, if I have you actually annotating something that's on paper, you know, it's not enough to just put a check mark, question mark, or exclamation point next to what you have read. You have to write down what you're thinking and why you made that mark, okay? So this is something that I have used in the past to help people kind of understand what a good annotation might look like, okay? So I have over here on the side some reminders. What surprised me? What did I wonder about? What challenged, changed, or confirmed my thinking? And the assignment I'm going to have you do today, your activity, is going to look just like this, just with a different text, okay? So this particular article actually I found about a year ago, so it's vaguely recent, so I kept it up here. It is called Behind the White Savior Plots, and I did not put the whole entire article up here. I just put in part of it. So let's just read through this part of it, and then we're going to look at the next slide in the annotations that were made and see this actually working, okay? So the text says, both Huck Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird, which are very, very famous classic books, both Huck Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird incorporate the white savior and magical Negro or Native themes. This is where Native, brown, and black characters exist as mere devices to help white characters reach moral enlightenment. Now this would be an example. I see a thin question right here, so I just want to show you. Okay, this would be where somebody might highlight this and put a question mark and be like, I don't know what the magical Negro theme is. I don't know what a Native theme is, okay? But it's a thin question because it's answered right here in the text in the next sentence, okay? It's where Native, black, and brown characters exist only as devices to help white characters basically show how much they can grow and become better people. That's what moral enlightenment means, okay? Jim in Huck Finn and Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird, like other Native, black, and brown characters in the mostly white-authored collection of literary classics, are flat and grossly stereotypical. They neither make decisions for themselves nor act fully human. They exist in deplorable conditions only to be pitied by more complete white characters. The non-white characters are victims whose victimhood is the core idea behind the white savior plot. The more helpless these characters are, the greater, more courageous, and more impressive the white savior's rescue seems. Okay, so that is the text. So let's look at a couple of annotations, okay? And I'm just going to go through the first slide here, and then I'm going to show you the slides I want you to do, because I know the longer these video tutorials become, the less likely you are to watch through to the end, okay? And I'm sorry, this is a long one. So this particular person made 3 annotations. Okay, first they underlined the whole first paragraph here about the white savior plot. And they had a question. They wrote, white savior plots help the white character become a better person. Are there other perspectives on this? Why is the white savior plot problematic? Okay, so this person's asking, so what's wrong with a white person saving a person of color? I mean, that's a good thing, right? Like, we want more woke white people. So they're asking that question. Okay, is this problematic? Obviously, the author of this particular piece thought so. They wrote a whole article about it, okay? So that could be something that could be debated among people in class. Is this or is this not a problem? The next annotation, okay, they underlined, like other native black and brown characters in the mostly white authored collection of literary classics, are flat and grossly stereotypical. That these characters are flat and grossly stereotypical. So here they put a check mark because they agree. It confirms their thinking. They said, agreed, Jim is not really a real person with many layers of personality. He's just a, quote, dumb slave who lets things happen to him and doesn't really take any action to stop the bad things other people do to him. He doesn't even seem to care. Now, this is annotated by somebody who is familiar with Huckleberry Finn. Okay, I don't expect you to know anything about Jim's character in Huckleberry Finn. You're freshmen in high school, you've probably never read this book, okay? But the truth is that if you know this book, you know that Jim's character is just, he really is just portrayed as this dumb slave, okay? And the truth is that he is so much more than that, but it's written by an author who doesn't really flesh him out and show different aspects of his character as much as could happen, okay? So, check mark because it confirms thinking. This person annotating agrees with the author. All right, so the last thing they underlined was the more helpless these characters are, the greater, more courageous, more impressive the white savior's rescue seems. So there's a question mark here because this annotator has a question, and that question is clearly written out here. Is the problem, quote, solved if white characters help people of color who are characterized more fairly and realistically? Can people of color make progress without the help of those who are in power, which is pretty much white men? Okay, so this is a super thick question. There's actually more than one question here, right? It's like, okay, so is it okay for the white savior to save the person of color if that person of color also has a really well-developed character? Does that make it better? And the other question is more general to the world in general, not just to the book, but, you know, we still live in a country where most of our leaders are middle class or wealthy white men. We can see that when we look at the structure of our Congress and our Senate, okay? So I think that's a valid question. You know, it's like when women got the vote 100 years ago, all of the men who were in Congress and Senate who had to change the Constitution to allow them to have the vote, the women needed the men to change the Constitution so they could make that change for themselves. Or rather, they couldn't make that change for themselves. People in power had to be on their side, okay? So I think this is a really valid question. Like, until you can, like, get white society to wake up and see things differently, will things change for people of color? Okay, so these are super, super deep questions. Now, do I expect your thick questions to be this thick and meaty when you first start? No, I don't. I'm just trying to give you some examples of what you can work toward, because the more you do this, the better you're going to become at it, okay? So you can take a look at these other slides and the annotations if you want later, but I'm going to skip because we are coming up on almost 25 minutes of video tutorial, and I know you guys love watching videos because my YouTube analytics, again, tell me you're not watching them, okay? Trying to teach you here, please watch this. All right, so here's the practice. This is what you are going to do for classwork today. There are slides. Oops, it should say the next 4 slides, not the next. The next 4 slides include a text from a recent news article. The article is about the fires, the wildfires, and what they're doing to the atmosphere in California. So using the method we learned today and using the comment function on your computer, annotate the text with your own thoughts and ideas. So your little comment button is right up here. I've had you use it before. You should be very familiar with this by now, okay? So I want you to highlight things that surprise you in yellow. Highlight things that make you question or wonder in pink. And highlight things that confirm, challenge, or change your beliefs in green. Make sure to leave a comment with your because next to each thing you highlight. Okay? You can't just highlight it. Cannot. You have to actually leave a comment. Highlight it, put the little button up here, okay? Right over here is your highlight color. You choose the color, green, yellow, or pink. All right? The article is here, okay? It's on 4 slides, but it's honestly not a very long article. It's just that slides I can't put a lot of info on a slide, okay? So the science behind the mysterious orange skies in California is your article for today that you're going to look at, and we are going to use this as practice for our real article of the week that we will start tomorrow. All right? If you have any questions, contact me in one of the million ways I have given you. Later. Love you. Bye.